In this lesson, we are going to be creating a command that will allow us generate data classes because we will be using tons of data classes in this project. So we will be creating a command that we can just write and generate our data class without manually creating PHP files. So let's start here by generating a command, PHP artisan make command, and I'm going to call that generate data. And that is created in the console commands folder, and we have our generate data.php class here. And if I go to the console and I just say PHP artisan, if you search very well, you will see that there is an app generate data already included in our list of available commands. Of course, this command doesn't do anything at the moment, but that's the whole point. It just registers that command, makes it available, and we can implement the logic. Now, what we want to do is create a command that will create a PHP file with the blueprint of the structure of creating a data object, okay, the data transfer object. And so if we just refresh our minds to go back to the data transfer object that we just created, you see that it does have the name of the class, it extends as party data, and then we have the properties and the rows. So that is a basic structure for our data object. So what we need to do here is create what we call stubs. And the stubs is like just the blueprint that holds the structure for your data object. And so here I'm going to create a folder called stubs. And under stubs, I'm going to create one called data.stub. Now in data.stub, again, this is just a regular file that contains the structure of how your data class will look like. So in this case, we do have the namespace. And here I'm going to just put a placeholder text here called namespace. When we create our files in the end, this will be replaced by the actual namespace of this file. And I'm going to show you how that is done in a moment. Because we cannot hard code a namespace in the blueprint just because, well, you'll be creating commands or data objects in so many different folders. So the namespace will change depending on what file we are creating. Then we want it to generically use or import this party data class. Then we have to define the class. Just like the namespace, we will also provide class extends data. And of course, that will also mean that this class variable will be substituted with the actual class name that we provide. Now down here, I'm just going to say we want the rules to be part of our blueprint. So rules that returns the array. And you see that this is not highlighted as a PHP class. It's just a stub. It's just a blueprint that each time we generate a new class, it will copy this information to that PHP file and then replace these variables with whatever we need. So here we just return nothing and will allow the user to then fill in this information with whatever they need. So that's a basic stub that we'll be using to generate our data objects. Now over here in the command that we just created, let's have a signature for it. In this case, I'm just going to call it make data. Okay, so which means that at the end of the day, we can simply say PHP artisan make data and generate that class. At the top here, we do see that this class by default extends Laravel's console command class. But we want to extend the generator command, and the generator command comes with Laravel. It's a class that you can use to actually generate files. So it does all the heavy lifting for generating files in your application. I'm going to extend the generator command class, and that gets imported here. Now you see that we have some squiggly lines here, which is totally okay. Because we are extending this class, there are some methods that we need to implement here. And if you look at it, it's complaining that we have not implemented a method called getStub. Because we created the stub, which is the blueprint, we need to implement a method and tell this class how to get that stub, where to get the stub from. So we are going to clear that error in a moment. Now, a quick description about this, we can just say create a new DTO class. And that is the description that you see in the terminal when you do PHP artisan and see a list of your commands. Now at the bottom here, we need to tell it where to get the stub that it will use to generate the class, okay? So it's defined in a protected. In fact, if we go to the class that we're extending here, you can see all the methods that are required. And this is the functionality that we use, okay? So we need to implement this getStub abstract method in the class that is actually extending this. So over here, we need to do protected function getStub, and this should return the path of the stub that we want to use to generate this class. So in this case, let's just go from this directory, and then the file is in stubs. Remember, we created the file in here in the command stubs. So in this directory, we look for it in the stubs and data.stub. Now, we don't even need a handle method because we'll let the class that we're inheriting, or the parent class here, handle the request, handle the process of creating the classes for us. So we will not be overriding the handle method. We'll go with the generic one. What I want to show you here though is that if you look at the namespace that we provided in the stub, we said we wanted to replace the class and the namespace. Laravel does take care of that for us in the generator command. So if you just search for this, you see that there is a function called replace class. So if you name your blueprint class, then it will simply search for it and replace that template string with the actual class name. If you choose to name it something else, then you have to change or override this method to tell it what the name is that you want to override, okay, that you want to replace for the class. In this case, we'll just stick to the class itself. Now, we also have the namespace. So there should be a method called replace namespace. So it's looking for namespace, root namespace. If you name your namespace in the stub here using any of these, then it will look for it. You can call it namespace or root namespace. It will simply look for it and replace that with the actual namespace where the file is being created. Now, one thing that I want to override in here is the get default namespace, okay? I want all my data classes to be created in the data folder. So I want to get the default namespace, and then whatever subfolder you want to create your stubs in, it will be created inside of that default namespace. And in here, we do have get default namespace. If we look for that function, it is just returning the root namespace, which is whatever namespace you have in the root up there. But here, I'm not going to be using the root namespace for this, okay? I'm going to override that and make it use the actual data folder that we created. So protected function get default namespace. And we say return root namespace. So root namespace here is our app here, okay? So root namespace, and I'll concatenate that with the data subfolder. So we are saying go from the root namespace and then into the data folder, and that will become our new default namespace. So whatever else we create, it will be nested inside of that. Now, something that we need to change here, we do have this called protected signature. Now, a protected signature will be a command that you just run without passing it any properties or any arguments, all right? So it will just require you to be able to run this command, but without any arguments. But I want to be able to provide an argument to this command, and the argument will be the name of the folder or the name of the class that I want to create. So instead of just saying signature, I'll actually say name, okay? So in my console, I can now do PHP artisan make data, and let me just call this test, and that will be the subfolder, and then test data, enter. And now we do see the class created successfully, which means if I go to my data, I should see that we have a new subfolder called test, and in there we have test data. If we open test data, we should see that created. Now we do have an error in the stub, which is why you see this presented this way. I think we're missing a semicolon in the stub. Yeah, here. So we did not have a semicolon to close that namespace declaration there. So we do have an error, but once you correct that, any class that you generate will be in good shape. So you see that we do have the namespace replaced. We have our class name replaced, and we have the blueprint that was defined in the stub all set up here. So going forward, we will just use this command to generate our class and continue to fill in the relevant information as we go. And I'm going to just delete this very quickly.